My son, Leo, was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by bright wrapping paper and the remains of his 8th birthday cake. It was a peaceful Saturday afternoon in our small suburban home. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, sat on the sofa with a smug, satisfied smile on her face. She had just given Leo a large, plush robotic teddy bear that was supposed to be the smartest toy on the market. Leo seemed happy at first, hugging the soft brown fur, but then he stopped moving. He started poking at the bear's plastic eyes with a confused look on his face. I didn't think much of it until he looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling just a little bit. "Why is there a tiny camera lens inside my toy's eye? Is the bear watching me?" My heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like it dropped through the floor. I froze, staring at the toy. Beatrice didn't flinch. She just kept smiling that sweet, artificial smile. My husband, Marcus, let out a loud, annoyed sigh from the armchair. "Leo, don't be silly," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "You're just overreacting, and you're going to offend your grandmother." I didn't listen to him. I reached for my phone. I hit 911. As I whispered into the phone, trying to keep my voice steady for the emergency dispatcher, Marcus jumped up from his chair. He looked more angry at me than concerned about the toy. He snatched the bear out of Leo's small hands, nearly knocking the poor boy over. "Stop this nonsense right now," Marcus hissed, his face turning a dark shade of red. "It's an educational toy, Jane. Probably has sensors for movement or something. You are making a massive scene over a birthday present." On the sofa, Beatrice let out a soft, mocking laugh. She adjusted her pearls and shook her head. "Children have such wild imaginations these days," she said smoothly. "I spent a lot of money on that gift to help him learn, and this is the thanks I get?" But the dispatcher on the other end of the line wasn't laughing. Her voice was professional and sharp. She asked me a question that made the hair on my arms stand up straight. "Ma'am, stay calm, but I need you to check something. Is that device currently connected to your home Wi-Fi network? Check your router settings if you can." Before I could even move toward the computer, the toy in Marcus's hands suddenly hummed. The bear's chest began to glow with a pulsing, eerie blue light. The toy suddenly activated, but it wasn't the cheery, high-pitched demo mode voice we had heard earlier at the party. Instead, a low, distorted adult voice crackled through the bear's hidden speakers. It sounded like someone speaking through a thick blanket or a digital filter. "I can see you, little buddy," the voice murmured. It was a cold, mechanical sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Leo shrieked and scrambled backward, hiding behind my legs. For half a second, I saw Beatrice's face go pale. Her eyes darted toward the bear, and her hand twitched toward her purse. But she recovered far too quickly, plastering that fake, concerned grandmotherly expression back onto her face. "Oh, it must be picking up a radio signal from the neighbors," she cried out, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. Marcus looked down at the glowing bear in his hands, his knuckles turning white as he gripped it. He looked confused, but he still didn't put it down. The voice from the bear spoke again, clearer this time. "Why are you hiding, Leo?" The dispatcher's voice turned urgent in my ear. "Ma'am, do not touch the device further. Take your son and leave the house immediately. Officers are being dispatched to your location right now. Get out of the building." I grabbed Leo's hand, my instinct to protect him taking over every other thought. I didn't care about the cake, the mess, or the expensive gifts. I just wanted to get my son away from that talking horror on the floor. But as I rushed toward the front entrance, Marcus stepped into my path. He physically stood in the doorway, blocking the exit with his large frame. He looked at me like I was the one who had lost my mind. "You are not taking my son out into the street over a glitchy toy," he snapped. "You are embarrassing my mother and making our family look like a group of lunatics." He seemed more worried about the neighbors seeing us run out than the fact that a stranger's voice was coming out of a stuffed animal. I looked at his face, searching for the man I married, but all I saw was a stubborn wall of denial. Then I noticed something else. He wasn't looking at the bear anymore. He was looking at Beatrice, and there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt. That's when the realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. He wasn't just being stubborn. He knew something about this. He knew about the toy. Outside, the first faint sound of police sirens began to echo through the neighborhood. The sound of the sirens getting louder seemed to break something inside Beatrice. The mask of the kind, elderly grandmother didn't just slip, it completely shattered. She stood up from the sofa, her posture becoming stiff and aggressive. Her eyes, which usually twinkled with fake warmth, became cold, sharp, and absolutely furious. "Give me that bear, Marcus," she demanded, her voice no longer shaky but commanding. "This is my property, and I won't have it poked and prodded by some low-level police officers." She turned her venomous gaze toward me, her lip curling in a snarl. You have always been an unfit mother, Jane. You're paranoid, unstable, and you've clearly been looking for an excuse to keep me away from my grandson. Leo started crying, big fat tears rolling down his cheeks as he clutched my jeans. Why is Grandma mad at me, Mommy? Did I break the bear? He thought it was his fault. My heart broke for him, but my anger at her was rising like a tidal wave. I held him tighter, staring back at the woman who had brought this evil into our home. Marcus didn't move from the door, but he looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. The dispatcher spoke one last time. Officers are pulling up to your driveway. Stay where you are. The front door burst open as 2 police officers entered the house. They didn't waste any time. One officer moved toward Marcus, gently but firmly pushing him away from the door so I could usher Leo into the hallway. The other officer stepped between me and Beatrice, creating a physical barrier. It was like a switch flipped in Beatrice's head the moment the uniforms appeared. She immediately collapsed back onto the sofa, wringing her hands and letting out loud, theatrical sobs. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she wailed to the officers. "My daughter-in-law is having some kind of mental breakdown. She's screaming and scaring the poor child over a simple toy." Marcus stood by the wall, trying to play the role of the confused mediator. "It's just a misunderstanding, officers," he said, his voice cracking. "My wife is just stressed from the party." The officers weren't buying the drama. One of them, a tall man with a stern face, picked up the glowing bear from the floor. He pulled out a small flashlight and shone it directly into the bear's plastic eye. He didn't say a word for a long minute. Then he looked up, his expression unreadable. He turned his attention toward Beatrice. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "where exactly did you say you bought this toy?" Beatrice took a deep breath, smoothing her skirt as if she were preparing for a high-stakes business meeting. She gave a very detailed, rehearsed answer. She claimed she had bought it from a high-end boutique in the city that specialized in imported European electronics. She even recited a fake store name and a general price point, making it sound like she had spent a small fortune on Leo's education. Her story was perfect. Too perfect. It felt like a script she had practiced in front of a mirror for weeks. The officer didn't blink. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tool. With a quick, practiced motion, he popped the plastic eye out of the bear's head. A tiny high-tech camera module fell into his palm, followed by a series of thin, professional-grade wires. "This isn't a store-bought sensor, ma'am," the officer said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "This is a custom-modified surveillance unit. It has been professionally integrated into the toy's motherboard. This didn't come from a boutique." He looked at the wires and then back at the sobbing grandmother. Beatrice's tears stopped instantly. She looked at the officer with a blank, frozen stare. "We're going to need to see your phone, ma'am," the officer said. "Right now." Beatrice's face hardened. All the fake sadness vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating defiance. "You certainly will not see my phone," she snapped, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "I know my rights. You need a warrant for that, and you have no probable cause to harass an old lady in her own son's home." She looked at Marcus, clearly expecting him to defend her, but Marcus was staring at the floor, his face as white as a sheet. The officer didn't seem surprised by her refusal. He stayed perfectly calm, which only seemed to make Beatrice more nervous. "You're right, ma'am," the officer replied. "I can wait for a warrant. It won't take long given the circumstances of a child being recorded without parental consent." Suddenly, Marcus stepped forward. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold his own device. "You don't need a warrant for hers yet," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You can look at mine." He held out his phone toward the officer, his thumb hovering over the screen. Beatrice let out a sharp, choked gasp. "Marcus, don't you dare," she screamed. But it was too late. Marcus swiped his thumb across the screen, unlocking the device. The officer took the phone, and as he scrolled through the apps, his entire face changed. The officer's eyes moved rapidly across Marcus's screen. I stood in the hallway, holding Leo, feeling like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. The officer flipped the phone around so Marcus could see the screen. It was a custom app with an icon that looked like a simple home security shield. When the officer tapped it, a live access history log appeared on the screen. It showed hundreds of entries over the last 3 months. Every time the app had been opened, a timestamp and a location were recorded. There were 2 distinct devices registered as admin users for the feed. One device was identified by a serial number that matched the phone in the officer's hand, Marcus's phone. The other device, labeled primary monitor, had a name that made my stomach churn. It was Beatrice's phone. The log showed that while I was home alone with Leo, Or while Leo was sleeping in his room, someone was logging in to watch and listen, sometimes for hours at a time. The primary monitor had been active as recently as 10 minutes ago. Marcus finally looked up, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw true soul-crushing fear in his eyes. He looked at me, then at the police, then at his mother. He knew he was caught. The silence in the room was shattered when Beatrice exploded. She didn't cry this time, she shrieked. She stood up and pointed a shaking finger at me. I had a right to know what was going on in that house, she yelled, her voice echoing off the walls. You were always so secretive, Jane. You never told me enough. I had a right to monitor my grandson's well-being. I am the matriarch of this family, and I will not be excluded from my grandson's life by a woman like you. She turned her fury toward Marcus, who was now weeping silently. And you. I did this for you. You said she was being difficult. I was just helping you keep an eye on things. She was completely unhinged now, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. She actually tried to claim that spying on a child was an act of love. She accused me of turning the family against each other, and poisoning Leo's mind. It was the classic defense of a narcissist who had been caught red-handed. The officer, however, wasn't interested in her family drama. He looked at the logs on Marcus's phone again, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked at Beatrice with a look of pure disgust. Ma'am, he said, his voice echoing with authority, did you just want to watch him? Or were you recording the footage to a cloud server? The room went deathly silent. That one word, recording, seemed to carry a weight that crushed the remaining air out of the house. The officer began to explain the legal reality in very plain terms. He talked about the massive difference between a nanny cam, used by a parent for safety, and a hidden third-party device used to record a minor without the legal guardian's knowledge or consent. He mentioned wiretapping laws and privacy violations that carried heavy prison sentences. Beatrice's face drained of what little color was left. She looked like a ghost, her mouth hanging open but no words coming out. She looked at Marcus, silently begging him to say something to fix this. Marcus whispered something so low I almost didn't hear it. Mom. You said you deleted everything. You told me the app only showed a live feed. You promised me there were no saved files. He looked at her with a mix of betrayal and realization. He had been her accomplice, but even he hadn't known the full extent of her obsession. He had been a fool, thinking he could control his mother's madness. I stood there, shivering, as I realized this hadn't just started today with the bear. This invasion of our privacy had been going on for months, maybe longer. As the officer continued to talk, my mind began to race backward. Suddenly, every odd, lucky moment from the past year started to click into place like pieces of a horrifying puzzle. I remembered how Beatrice would call me and ask random questions that she somehow already knew the answers to. I remembered how she would make comments about private conversations Marcus and I had in our bedroom, conversations we thought were completely confidential. She would mention things Leo had said while playing alone in his nursery, things he hadn't repeated to anyone else. I had always thought she was just an incredibly intuitive, albeit overbearing grandmother. I had even felt guilty for thinking she was creepy or intrusive. I felt a wave of physical sickness wash over me. I had been living in a glass house, and she had been sitting in the front row of the theater, watching the most private moments of my life. The fury that followed the sickness was hotter than anything I had ever felt before. I wanted to scream, but I had to stay strong for Leo. The officer looked at Beatrice and then at Marcus. We have enough evidence here to proceed, he said firmly. Officers are being sent to your residence right now, ma'am. We need to search your house for the server. Marcus saw the police preparing to take the next step, and he panicked. He didn't move toward his mother, instead he stumbled toward me. He tried to grab my arm, but I pulled away as if his skin were made of fire. Jane, please, he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. Don't do this. Don't let them go to her house. It was just a mistake. She's an old woman, she was just lonely. She missed Leo so much it made her do something stupid. He actually looked me in the eyes and tried to tell me that I was the one pushing her too far by being so strict with her visitation. He was still trying to spin the narrative, still trying to protect the woman who had just violated our son's safety. He looked at the police officers and tried to tell them it was a family matter that we could handle internally. He was more afraid of the family name being ruined in the local news than he was of the trauma his son was experiencing. I looked at him, this man I had shared a bed with for 10 years, and realized I didn't know him at all. I am done, I said, my voice cold and steady. I am done protecting people who endanger my child and treat my life like a reality show. Step away from me, Marcus. The officers moved in. When the handcuffs clicked around Beatrice's wrists, she didn't go quietly. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, her voice shrill and terrifying. She called me a dramatic brat, and a cruel, heartless woman. She yelled that I was destroying a legacy, and that I would regret the day I ever met her family. She used words I didn't even know she knew. Vile, disgusting names that made the officers wince. She struggled against them, kicking at the furniture and trying to bite the officer's hand. It was a complete mental breakdown of a woman who had never been told no in her entire life. Marcus stood in the corner, covering his face with his hands, sobbing like a child. He didn't even try to help her. He was too busy mourning his own comfortable life. Leo was shaking violently against my leg, his hands over his ears to block out his grandmother's screams. I picked him up and walked into the kitchen, trying to put a wall between us and the madness. One of the officers followed me in, looking genuinely sympathetic. He waited for the screaming to fade as they led her out to the patrol car. "Ma'am," he asked quietly, "do you want to press charges? We have the evidence, but we need your statement to finalize this." I looked down at Leo. He was staring at the floor, his little chest heaving with deep, shaky breaths. He looked up at me, his eyes red and puffy from crying. "Mommy," he whispered, "is Grandma in trouble because of me? Did I do something wrong by asking about the eye?" It was the most heartbreaking thing I had ever heard. My 8-year-old son thought he had broken his family because he was smart enough to notice a hidden camera. I knelt down so I was at eye level with him. I took his small, cold hands in mine and looked him straight in the eyes. "No, Leo," I said, my voice firm and full of love. "You did the bravest thing anyone could do. You told the truth. Grandma is in trouble because she broke the law and she broke our trust. You are a hero for protecting yourself." I stood up and looked at the officer. I thought about the months of recorded footage. I thought about the betrayal by my husband. I thought about the harmless gift that was actually a weapon. I didn't hesitate for a single second. "Yes," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet kitchen. "I am pressing charges. I want every single one of them held accountable. I'm not letting this go." The news of the arrest spread through Marcus's extended family like a wildfire in a dry forest. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up with messages and missed calls. It wasn't just Marcus's siblings. It was aunts, uncles, and even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. The messages were almost all the same. "Jane, how could you do this? Think of the family's reputation. Beatrice is an old woman, she won't survive jail." They called me unstable, and said I had overreacted to a simple grandmotherly whim. They claimed I had broken Grandma's heart, over a misunderstanding. Not a single one of them asked how Leo was doing. Not one person checked to see if my son was traumatized by the fact that his own grandmother was spying on him through his toys. They were only concerned with the embarrassment of the police cars in the driveway and the potential for a public scandal. I realized then that the rot didn't just stop at Beatrice. It was built into the very foundation of their family culture. Loyalty to the bloodline was more important than the safety of a child. Then a new number popped up on my screen. It was a lawyer I didn't recognize. I answered it, my heart pounding in my chest. The man on the phone identified himself as a criminal defense attorney. He wasn't calling to defend Beatrice. He was calling to warn me. He explained that because the surveillance device was connected to our home network, and because Marcus had admitted to having the app on his phone, the situation was much more complex than a simple, crazy grandmother story. He told me that Marcus could be charged with criminal negligence, or even as an accessory to the illegal recording of a minor. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. This wasn't just a family feud anymore. It was a full-blown legal nightmare. My husband, the man who was supposed to be the primary protector of our home, had participated in a criminal conspiracy against our own son. The lawyer explained that the state was looking into whether Marcus had actively helped Beatrice install the modified hardware, or if he had simply looked the other way. Either way, his legal standing was in serious jeopardy. It felt like the floor was falling away from me again. I had lost my mother-in-law, and now I was realizing I had lost my husband a long time ago. A few hours later, a knock came at the door. It was a process server handing Marcus a formal notice. He was being summoned for a deposition. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, the legal papers spread out in front of him like a death warrant. He looked broken. The Mediator Act was gone, and the denial was finally starting to crumble under the weight of the law. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow and dark. "She told me it was for safety, Jane," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She said she saw a news report about kidnappings and she wanted to make sure Leo was okay when we weren't in the room. I didn't think it was a big deal at first. I let her install the app because she wouldn't stop nagging me about it." He finally admitted that he had ignored his own gut feeling for months because it was easier than arguing with his mother. He had traded our son's privacy for a little bit of peace and quiet from Beatrice's constant demands. He begged for my forgiveness, reaching out to touch my hand, but I pulled back. "You watched those feeds, Marcus," I said, my voice cold. "You saw her watching us and you said nothing. You let her record our son while he was playing, while he was sleeping, while he was most vulnerable." I looked at the man I had once loved and saw a stranger who had failed the most basic test of fatherhood. "I need you to pack a bag," I said firmly. "I want you to leave. Now." The next few days were a blur of action and adrenaline. I didn't have time to cry or mourn my marriage. I had a son to protect. I contacted my own lawyer and filed for emergency custody arrangements, citing the police report and the ongoing investigation. I spent an entire afternoon changing every single password in my life: bank accounts, emails, social media, and especially the home Wi-Fi. I hired a locksmith to come and change the locks on every door and window in the house. I even went through every single toy in Leo's room, checking for anything suspicious. For the first time in months, the air in the house felt different. It felt lighter, cleaner, and finally truly safe. The constant nagging feeling that I was being watched had vanished. Marcus tried to call me a dozen times, but I ignored every single one. I was building a fortress around my son, and there was no room for people who broke the walls down from the inside. Leo seemed to sense the change, too. He started sleeping through the night again, and the shadows he used to talk about in the corners of his room seemed to disappear. But the real test was still coming. The court date for Beatrice's preliminary hearing had finally arrived. The courtroom was cold and smelled of old paper and floor wax. Beatrice sat at the defense table, flanked by two expensive-looking lawyers. She was dressed in a conservative navy suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, looking every bit the victimized, elderly socialite. When she took the stand, she put on a performance that would have won an Oscar. She painted herself as a concerned, loving grandmother, who was only trying to protect her precious grandson from a hostile home environment. She claimed I was the one who was unstable and that she was a victim of malicious prosecution by a daughter-in-law who hated her. But my lawyer was ready. We didn't rely on emotions. We relied on the data. We presented the digital logs from the server the police had found in her basement. We showed the judge the hours of saved footage. Footage that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with voyeurism. We showed that she had even been recording conversations I had with my doctor on the phone. The evidence didn't lie, and it didn't have a rehearsed script. The judge, a stern woman with years of experience, wasn't moved by Beatrice's tears or her status in the community. She looked at the files and then at Beatrice with a look of pure steel. The judge's ruling was swift and devastating for the Brooks legacy. Beatrice was legally barred from having any contact with Leo or me. No phone calls, no letters, and definitely no visits. She was placed on a strict probation while the criminal charges moved toward a trial. Marcus didn't fare much better. The judge was appalled by his willful blindness to his mother's crimes. He lost his right to unsupervised visitation with Leo until he completed a series of court-mandated parenting and ethics courses. He was also ordered to pay for Leo's therapy for the foreseeable future. The silence in the courtroom after the ruling was announced was deafening. Beatrice tried to scream one last time, but her lawyers quickly ushered her out of the side door to avoid the waiting cameras. Marcus stood in the hallway, looking like a ghost of the man he used to be. He didn't even try to talk to me this time. He just walked away, his head down. I took a deep breath, the weight on my shoulders finally starting to lift. We had won, but it was a hollow victory. Leo was safe, but the family he knew was gone. As we walked to the car, Leo looked up at me and asked one final question. "Mommy," Leo asked as I buckled him into his seat, "why didn't Dad protect me? He knew about the bear, right? Why didn't he tell the voice to go away?" That question cut deeper than any of Beatrice's insults or the family's hateful messages. It was the core of the entire tragedy. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his father chose his own mother's approval over his son's safety? I didn't lie to him. I didn't try to sugarcoat the truth or make excuses for Marcus. "I don't know why he made those choices, Leo," I said softly, brushing a stray hair from his forehead. "Some people are afraid of standing up to bullies, even when the bully is their own mother. But I promise you this. I will never, ever let anyone hurt you like that again. From now on, it's just us and we are going to be okay. We are going to build a new life where everyone tells the truth." I made a silent vow in that car to rebuild our world from the ground up, without the secrets, without the spying, and without the people who valued peace over integrity. We drove away from the courthouse, leaving the drama behind us in the rearview mirror. In the weeks that followed, the extended family finally learned the full, ugly truth. My lawyer had released a summary of the evidence to counter the lies Beatrice had been spreading. When the cousins and aunts actually saw the logs, When they realized she had been spying on them too during holiday parties at our house, the tone of their messages changed almost overnight. Suddenly, the apologies started arriving. We didn't know Jane. She lied to us too. We're so sorry for what we said. I didn't respond to any of them. Their apologies were too late, and they were only born out of their own fear of being recorded. They weren't sorry for what they did to me. They were sorry they had been caught on the wrong side of the scandal. Then a package arrived at the door. It was an unmarked envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note from Beatrice, despite the restraining order. She tried to blame me one last time, saying that if I had just been a better wife, she wouldn't have had to do what she did. She was still trying to reach out and pull me back into her web of guilt. I didn't even finish reading it. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even get angry. I simply picked up the phone and called my lawyer. I handed the message and the envelope over to the authorities as a violation of her probation. I realized then that true revenge isn't about screaming or getting even. It's about letting the consequences of a person's actions finally land on their doorstep. Chose peace. I chose to focus on Leo's school, his soccer games, and his new camera-free toys. Life started to feel normal again, but it was a new normal. It was a life where we didn't have to look over our shoulders or wonder if the walls had ears. I started a new job, and we even started talking about moving to a different town to truly start over. The Brooks Fine Furniture name was tarnished beyond repair in our city, but my son's name was clean. He was thriving, his laugh echoing through the halls of our home without fear. The darkness that had lived in our house for so long was finally gone, replaced by the simple, bright light of a life lived in the truth. We were free. Months later, Leo was playing in the backyard, running through the grass with a new, simple plastic airplane. There were no batteries, no smart features, and definitely no hidden cameras. He was laughing loudly, his eyes bright with pure, uncomplicated joy. He ran over to me and asked if he could gather up his old, fancy toys to donate to the children's hospital. "I don't need the toys that talk back anymore, Mom," he said with a grin. "I like the ones where I have to use my own imagination." I smiled and hugged him tight, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. That harmless gift from Grandma had been a nightmare, but it had also been the catalyst for our escape. It had exposed the rot in our family and forced me to become the protector my son deserved. It had cost me a marriage and a family, but it had saved my son's future. As I watched him play, I realized that the best gift I ever gave him wasn't something wrapped in a box with a bow. It was the truth, the safety of an honest home, and the strength to say no to people who don't respect his boundaries. We were finally whole, and we were finally home.